some of the worst research we do on human beings is when we study things in complete isolation, right? Like when we take a cell or a compound out of the human body, we put it in a test tube, petri dish, and we study it in isolation, because that's not how cells behave. It's not how human beings behave. We operate in communities, not in isolation. I think that we're slowly sort of micro-poisoning ourselves to death. In this country, we use something called single-dose toxicity. I hear people say all the time, the dosage determines the poison. And the dosage doesn't always determine the poison. It's the cumulative dosage very often that determines the poison. 23 major sunscreen brands since 2020 have been removed from the shelves because of their cancer-causing ingredient.
Hey.
Awesome, man.
Good to see you, man.
It's good to see you, brother.
Yeah. So, Gary, you taught me something really cool. After I started reading about it, the documentation was out there, but it wasn't something that I would have just found.
Right.
So I follow what I call low carb nutrition, which is really carnivore. But
I remember when we met, you were kind of just starting the carnivore diet.
Yeah,
and I was like, this guy's crazy. He's just going to eat meat. And then I started looking into it, and I was like,
right. It wasn't that crazy.
It wasn't that crazy.
No, it actually makes perfect sense. But you told me something really important, which is we had a mutual friend at the time, and he would follow the same thing that I was doing, and then every once in a while he would just kind of go off the rails and eat like 2 pieces of chocolate cake.
Yep.
And you looked at his blood work and you're like, hey, you have high LDL cholesterol, which is normal with somebody who's on the carnivore diet, and that in itself may not be a problem. But when you also have high triglycerides,
yes,
now you're having glycation of arteries.
Yeah, glycation of arteries, and you're shrinking the particulate size of cholesterol, so you're kind of making it more dangerous. Easier to cross that endothelial lining, right, and get eaten by a macrophage and start that whole process.
Right.
I think cholesterol gets blamed for a lot of crimes that it's not committing.
Right.
It's like blaming the firefighter for the fire. Because they're on scene.
Right.
But they didn't light the fire. Right. They're actually cholesterol is kind of there to repair the tissue. The damage is what caused it. What called cholesterol to that.
Well, and it collects at a point of inflammation. My analogy is it's like leaves plug up your drain and cause a flood in your yard. So cut down all the trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe just clean your drains.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe just not have the leaves like just sitting right there on top of the drain. I think that's the problem. Is like people with high triglycerides. Like, you can't be both. You can't be low carb and then gorge on carbohydrates from time to time.
No, that's the worst thing in the world.
Worst thing in the world.
Or to be keto and then sort of date the keto diet, not marry it. It's one of those diets that
it's
you have
a one-way street.
Committed
just
to.
do it.
It can have profound benefits. I mean, I think its origins actually are in the for epilepsy.
That's right.
What it was designed for.
First discovered.
But we can run on fats. Beta hydroxybutyrate is a fuel source like carbohydrates are, and we can actually run on fats. And for people that have very high triglycerides, like Dana White, when I first met Dana White, it was a kind of a hard concept for him to get his arms around. That his triglycerides were at such a level, they were well over 800, fasted, by the way.
Whoa.
And I said, we're going to put you on a high fat diet to bring the fat in your blood down. And he was like, come again. I was like, we're just going to try to put your body into a state of ketosis so that it really sees fat as a fuel source. And that's what happened. I mean, week over week, the triglycerides just plummeted. They went from in the 800s into about 139 after about 10 weeks, in a fasted state. And so when that's happening, that you're actually slightly increasing the particle size of LDL cholesterol, making it a little less dangerous. What's interesting is when I was in the mortality space, and this is anecdotal, so I don't have a clinical study to back this up, but we processed death claims, and we would triangulate that death claim back into the medical record. I did not see in 22 years a single centenarian, not once, that did not have clinically elevated levels of LDL cholesterol when they passed. Because, a lot of times they would die in assisted care living, or they would die in the hospital, and they would actually have recent blood work on them. And when you file a death claim, we would get the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death. The cause of death, in many cases, was not cardiac related. And we would look at their blood profile, and they would have elevated LDL cholesterol. They had low triglycerides. Yeah. And I was like, well, why are all these centenarians having elevated LDL cholesterol? And I think a lot of times
Because it's not indicated for an early death. That's
yeah.
why.
I mean, I've never seen a clinical study, and I'm sure the haters are going to come out and prove me wrong. And if they do, great. I haven't seen a study where LDL cholesterol on its own was directly linked to cardiovascular disease.
Oh no, there's no mechanisms whatsoever. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow.
Are you? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
amazing. So that's it. You know, I mean, and I think some of the worst research we do on human beings is when we study things in complete isolation. Right? Like when we take a cell or a compound out of the human body, we put it in a test tube, petri dish, you know, and we study it in isolation because that's not how cells behave. It's not how human beings behave. We operate in communities, not in isolation. In fact, we knew in the mortality space, if you wanted to cut a human being's life expectancy in half at any age, put them in isolation.
Yeah, sure.
Right? I mean, the same.
Well, like during COVID.
Yeah, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the worst thing to happen to us was, you know, residential quarantining, social distancing, masking, because this took all the hormetic stress off the body.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that, you know, so often we think about stress as being such a negative thing, but we know if you don't load a bone, it doesn't strengthen. If you don't tear a muscle, it doesn't grow. If you don't challenge the immune system, it weakens.
Right.
But we think about all these things as being stressors, and because I feel like aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort, that we aggressively pursue comfort until we actually age faster.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We get weaker.
Yeah.
Glycation. I mean, glycation is just rapid aging of every cell.
Yeah.
And I've been using that word a lot because I think people are starting to understand, like, wow, it's like really the amount of junk food I eat is really just putting me into a gear.
Seed oils,
like shifting you into like
foods.
the rapid self-destruction gear.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
and then
garbage.
and then you have elevated LDL cholesterol, also because your diet's shit, but you have elevated LDL cholesterol, and then you have all of this inflammation going on, and so they say,
well, blockages,
LDL cholesterol is it's like the fireman example. You know, don't blame the firemen for the fire. I mean, they're there to put it out, and you can't say, well, every time there's a serious fire, there's a fireman.
These
there,
guys show up so clearly.
Yeah, these guys show up, so we should, if we stop them from showing up, then maybe we'll stop the damage. But now you have nobody to put out the fire. Yeah. Right. And so the idea is to stop the fire from starting in the first place. Right. It's to stop the inflammatory process. Look at
the inflammatory process.
Yeah. And this is why you see other things, you know, in relation to this too, because anytime you have, you know, inflammation in the endothelial lining, you know, the glycocalyx, the endocalyx, but the glycocalyx of the artery, you know, this is usually a systemic issue, right? Because, you know, we think that the skin is the largest organ in the body, but I would sort of differ and say, well, you know, your skin has the surface area of about half a tennis court, but the lining of our arteries has the surface area of 6 tennis courts. It's 12 times the surface area. So imagine if you get an inflammatory condition in 63,000 miles of blood vessel. You know, what are the downstream consequences of that? Well, you have this myriad of what seems to be unrelated consequences, but they're all coming from the inflammatory condition in this barrier between the blood and the tissue. And if you know, in the simplest of terms, if nutrients can't leave the blood and enter the tissue, and waste can't leave the tissue and enter the blood, that in and of itself is going to cause such a myriad of seemingly unrelated consequences that we chase them as if they are individual pathologies, but they're all related to the same thing.
Right.
You know?
Just and sometimes they manifest differently.
Yeah.
When you have the chronic inflammation, you can have arterial stiffness, you can have gout, you can have eczema. Like, they're kind of all coming from the same source. It's just our genetics really just determine sort of how our body interprets the signals. But really,
we can be predisposed
when you have these inflammatory conditions, it's like, it's obvious. It's what you're putting in your mouth.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
It's what you're putting in your mouth and what you're swallowing and what you're breathing. And, you know, I think that we're slowly sort of micro-poisoning ourselves to death. You know, in this country, we use something called single-dose toxicity. I hear people say all the time, the dosage determines the poison. And the dosage doesn't always determine the poison. It's the cumulative dosage very often that determines the poison, right? I mean, nobody got...
look at carbon monoxide.
Carbon monoxide, mercury poisoning. Nobody got mercury poisoning from eating one piece of tuna fish. They got mercury poisoning because they ate mercury-laden tuna fish over and over and over and over and over again, and the cumulative toxicity is what eventually costs the pathology. And I think if maybe we would think about the human body like a temple, and we would develop this sort of invisible barrier so that we filter things before it gets to our temple, rather than letting our temple be the filter. Right. Just that alone, just that vantage point would serve us well, because we'd start thinking about tap water, and we'd start thinking about our air, and we would start thinking about the food that we're eating. Like, is this going to serve me, or is it going to steal from me?
How about sunscreen?
So, I mean, what is it? I read something the other day. Was I want to get this quote right, but 23 major sunscreen brands since 2020 have been removed from the shelves because of their cancer-causing ingredients. Yeah. I'm like, wait a second, the sunscreen is being pulled from the market for causing cancer? I thought it was supposed to be cancer preventive. In fact, I think, most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not that we're getting too much sun. Yeah. I think that most of us are not getting enough sun. And I'm not talking about laying out there until you're barbecued, but the truth is we're very photovoltaic beings. We get a lot of benefits from sunlight, not the UVA and UVB, but the blue light from the sun, vitamin D3 and all of the ancillary products that are made from sunlight.
A lot of people don't realize you don't get all that from a tanning salon either.
No.
Like, people think it's the same.
No, that's just high UVA, UVB. I mean, you can target things, like you can excite the melanin in the skin, but you're not getting those real therapeutic nanometers of wavelength that are, passing into the mitochondria and kicking out a gas, mitochondrial nitric oxide, and forcing oxygen to dock, right? And causing cytochrome C oxidase to release this mitochondrial nitric oxide gas, and then grabbing oxygen, which, I say that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease, because oxygen is really what is the most beneficial fuel for the mitochondria. Yeah. And when we put this precious gas into the mitochondria, we get a 16-fold step up in cellular energy, right? I mean, we have a 38 ATP instead of 2. We'll net 36 ATP instead of 2 ATP, which means that you have 16 times more cellular energy. So now you got a cell that can eliminate waste and repair and detoxify and regenerate, rather than a cell that is starving. And I think we often forget too that, when we eat, we're actually the last in line to be fueled, right? I mean, the only reason why we eat is to feed our gut bacteria, right? None of our cells can use the protein that we ingest, or the carbohydrates that we eat, or the sugars, or the fats. What happens is the bacteria metabolize those, turn those into compounds that leave the luminal wall of the gut and enter the bloodstream, and then those pass through the cell wall, and then eventually they enter the mitochondria and are turned into ATP. We're only fueled by one energy source, so we're kind of the last in line. And we think of food as fuel, but really ATP is our fuel. So what is the most beneficial way to get ATP is how we should. I feel like we should think about it, at least from an aging perspective. Yeah. Right? Is what is causing accelerated aging? Well, the degradation of the mitochondria. At the end of the day. I want to talk about your concept that you defend a lot about progressive loading, because clearly you're holding a lot of muscle, and the fact that you use resistance bands, I think to a lot of people would be considered a hoax. We think that we need to move massive amounts of weight over distance in order to build muscle. And I've heard you say so many times that that's such an archaic view of how the body strengthens itself. So your work was in progressive loading.
Well, my work was in osteogenic loading. Okay. So specific with bone. But when I saw what would happen to bone when we emulate high impact forces. So, if I'm going to absorb high impact forces with my upper extremities, is a 120-degree angle of inclusion between upper and lower arm. Back of the hand is in line with the clavicle. There's very specific biomechanics for that. So when I looked at the force outputs that people are capable of, for me, I can push about 2,000 pounds from here to here. And, it's like the human body is so powerful, yet we don't access any of that in fitness. And so I started looking at fitness in general was like kind of a sore subject with me, because I remember I had been lifting weights for 20 years and I really didn't get much out of it. Right. And pretty much everybody I knew, I got some, I was a little bit better than most people. I was a little more careful because I knew more. But still, it was like the results were not there. And I knew some genetic outliers who did great. And then the rest of the people that worked out all the time, boy, they looked the same every year. Just same. And it's just like, it amazes me with the fitness industry, how many people are willing to go year after year after year and defend what they're doing. I don't know, maybe because they think they're badass or something like that. But I think that it's the ego thing. It's the I lift dangerous weights, therefore I'm really tough. And it's like, no, you have a double chin and baby arms. You're not tough.
You have a double chin and baby arms.
I say this to people all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, where are all these great fit people? Why is it that if you want to take a random sample of the population, people at an airport, it's not perfect. But it's better than just going to a shopping mall because shopping
or Disney World
because there's a demographic splits, and whereas an airport people kind of travel because they have to. So you go through an airport. Let's say you see 1,000 people. How many airports do you need to go through before you see somebody that's really fit, a guy or girl? Where you're like, whoa! I've been counting because I go to a lot of airports.
Right.
Yeah, it takes about 10 trips to an airport. So today I was at 2 airports. Didn't see anybody. And so, basically, it's like about 10 airports, I see one person. I'm determining, as far as fit looking, now that has nothing to do with health, but I'm talking about results that are seen, because ultimately, if your fitness program isn't serving your ego, you're quitting.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. Like, your blood test looks good, and you're like, yeah, but I'm spending hours, and it's just like, I still got a double chin and baby arms. So they don't, they're like, okay, whatever. Like you got to look better.
Yes.
Like that's part of the winning strategy.
Yeah.
And if 1 out of 10,000 people are the ones that are getting this result, then what we're doing is ridiculous. It's probably the most failed human endeavor of all.
Right. Just the amount of time we commit for the result that we get.
Yeah,
right. It's almost like the definition of insanity, right?
Yeah,
and same thing over and over again.
And people just dedicated to working out. Like the joke about CrossFit. The only way you know somebody does CrossFit is they tell you they do CrossFit. That's why they keep talking about it. So you never know they work out by looking at them.
Yeah.
And it's not anything in particular against CrossFit, though. I got plenty of jokes about CrossFit. It's more just like what you're doing with your workouts isn't doing anything. So when I went from osteogenic loading research and then kind of compared all that to some of the fitness literature I've been reading, we don't do shit with weights. We're really not engaging very much. And the new latest thing that people are just running around like half jacked off dogs about is this long range repetitions or lengthened partials. So like really making sure that you're loading the stretch position of the muscle.
I've seen a lot of
and
that.
It's like, what? Okay, this is true. It's very important. However, where do you go to fatigue when you lift anything? In the weakest range of motion. The weakest range of motion, the weakest link in the chain, whatever analogy you want to put on it, this is the weak part.
Right.
So saying that's where all the stimulus is, it's like, no, that's just where you go to fatigue. So if you didn't go to fatigue here, that probably means you didn't go to fatigue at all.
Right.
So it's just like almost like a child's argument, like, yay, we found the anabolic position, but no, fatigue is what's important. Now with variable resistance, when I'm doing a chest press, I go to fatigue in the strongest range of motion first. And then I keep doing repetitions until I can't get there. So I went to fatigue there. Now I shorten the repetitions. Now I'm going to fatigue in a slightly less strong position. Then I continue to go. So I may go to fatigue 10 separate times in one exercise
throughout
experience.
The full range of motion.
And most people never go to fatigue. So it's not that bands are magic and weights are stupid. It's that your brain and your central nervous system is wired for safety. Right. And if you can go to fatigue in a diminishing range, your body won't stop you from hurting yourself because you won't. Right. Therefore, you actually get the same kind of training stimulus as these genetic outliers who fire more muscle in their weaker range. That's really the difference between people who end up in the NFL and the rest of us.
You're taking advantage of the neural inhibition, right? I mean,
the lack of neural inhibition.
Yeah, the lack of neural inhibition, right?
The only other person who uses that term. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Oh, yeah. People accuse me of making that term up, and it's just like, no, it's in all kinds of like neurological.
Well, I mean, that's the reason why we can't make a fist and so hard that we tear the.
Squeeze a fist hard enough to break your own finger.
Right.
You can't do it.
Or tear your muscle from the.
Everyone has enough strength to break their own finger by squeezing a fist, but your body won't let you do it because it's got a self-preservation mechanism called
neural inhibition.
That's right.
Yeah. Amazing. So you can take advantage of the lack of by fatiguing yourself through an entire range of motion. And you're probably also, the name of the game here is tear myofibril tissue. So you're tearing more myofibril tissue, for the same amount of time. Would you say?
I say stimulating.
For stimulating.
Yeah, because the whole micro tear thing, it's kind of sometimes running in parallel, but like marathon runners get more micro tears than weightlifters do, but they don't grow any muscle.
Right.
So I see that as sort of a distracting
it's the stimulation.
Factor. Yeah, it's when the central nervous system looks at a cell and says, okay, this cell's done. We can't use it anymore. It's reached the stimulation point. And then it's called out, which is why as you lift, you're going through repetition after repetition, you're getting weaker.
And what about the whole time under tension theory? And
so time under tension, it's important, but what we're really doing is time under variable tension. So you want to get as much loading work done in a given amount of time, or the same amount of time you want to do more loading work, and that's like the app that connects to the X3 bar that's wired. It's got the connection. You're looking to create more total force each set you do, or each workout you do, because you do one set per movement.
Right. Which is amazing. I mean, we call it one set, but it's a hell of a set.
Yeah, it's drinking from the fire hose. Yeah, your body is not wired to stop you.
Yeah,
your body is wired to stop you when you lift weights because it's dangerous.
I remember we went to Dr. Mercola's house. Yeah. In Daytona. Was it Daytona Beach?
Daytona Beach.
We went to Dr. Mercola's house in Daytona Beach, and you were installing some strong equipment in there.
Yeah.
And we took him through the X bar workout. I was actually very surprised. X3, sorry. Yeah, X3 workout. And I was very surprised at the density that he had in his muscle tissue, because at the time I was heavily training for triathlon.
Okay.
And we did the same workout, and I was like, here's this guy, he's like 10 years older than I am. He's very thin. But
strong.
He's so freaking strong. I was like, this is embarrassing.
He had done variable resistance training for years.
Yeah.
With chains. So he had a gym he went to, and what they do is, how the chains, we'll explain it.
Yeah, the heavier and the...
Yeah, like you have a barbell, and it's on each end it's connected to two piles of equal chains. And as you lift it, you're picking up more big links of it, and we're talking like battleship anchor chain, like really heavy chains.
Yeah.
And so as you're picking up more links, each one of those links weighs like 10 pounds or 7 pounds or something like that. And so it's heavy as you go far from the floor, and as you go closer to the floor, it's lighter. So he had been training like that. So as soon as he saw X3, it was just like,
this makes sense.
Obvious.
I just remember him
one of these is living in my suitcase.
Doing the front squats, and I was like, dude, this guy's already done like 12 more reps than I could ever do.
Yeah.
And
he went right to the heaviest band first.
He went right to the heaviest band first. That was amazing. Yeah. So, I mean, clearly it works. It works even in older ages. And I think if you want to live a long time, you got to lift heavy things. You got to put the body.
There's no getting away from heavy.
Yeah.
Like you have to put heavy loads through the body. Mm-hmm. And with variable resistance, your body's just not afraid of it.
Yeah.
It welcomes it. You're more lit up when you do a variable resistance set. And here's the weird thing. When I get stopped in airports, usually when some troll sees you in person, they kind of don't come at you like wanting to yell in your face. So I get approached in airports all the time, and I can tell if somebody's a bodybuilder or a power lifter just by the question they ask.
Yeah.
Because the bodybuilders are like, hey, like, do you secretly lift weights? And, because they, in their mind, it's like weights are everything. But a power lifter, they've trained with variable resistance some of them partially, most of them, almost all of their training variable resistance. You look at Westside Barbell. Westside Barbell did one thing differently. Two, the sitting down on the box during the squat, that's one thing that people had done that before, but they made it cool.
So they actually rested and then exploded.
Basically, your butt fully touches the seat because you want to make sure your legs go parallel because they're training for the squat as a sport, as an event. So you got to get it just right. And I think neurologically, that's a good thing. If you're not training for the squat, then it doesn't matter. But the other thing was bands. They put bands on all the bars. Heavy users of variable resistance. In only a few years, and this currently stands, Westside Barbell has more world records than any country on earth, including the United States.
I did
not know that. If you took Westside out of the United States. Right. And the answer is variable resistance. And I know somebody will be like, well, they also, whatever. Okay, sure. Yeah. They did some other shit, I guess. I mean, there were natural athletes there and enhanced athletes, but they're natural and enhanced athletes all over the rest of the world
I agree.
Weren't doing variable resistance. So to me, it's very obvious. And the good news is I've never met somebody who gave X3 an honest shot and wasn't completely hands down like doing that as their main strength workout. Now, like some of the pro athletes I work with, the Miami Heat, they're 100% X3. But they still have to do their drills, and
of course, yeah.
You got to be good.
Functional.
Yeah, I think sometimes I say that, and maybe the clip for Instagram just ends right there, and it's just like
they're like, really? See, fraud.
Oh, really? The Miami Heat's not shooting baskets anymore? Yeah, of course they are. But as far as just the strength, and also like prehabbing joints, building thicker tendons and ligaments is great research. For Benjamin and Ralph's 1998, I was going to laugh because I quote that all the time. Your tendons and ligaments get thicker. Your joint capsule becomes more powerful when you hyperload that strong position. And we do it at OsteoStrong, and to a lesser degree, it happens with X3.
This is awesome.
Yeah, because the weight climbs as you get into that range of motion.